Glenn, welcome to Biohacking News.
Thank you for having me on, Tony.
Good to see you. When I started this podcast, I did them all pretty much in person, and now it's pretty much all online. But it's really nice to be in a studio, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We haven't done this for about 20 years,
Yeah.
20 years. So,
Well, maybe that's a good starting point because, why don't you tell the story of how we actually met? Because you and I used to be on top of the charts together, didn't we?
we were, and we used to wonder who each other were because one week Tony would be number one in the Audible self-help charts, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the next week I'd be number one. And so we kind of were vying for the number one position for a long time. And then Audible asked us to do a webinar, didn't they?
Yeah.
And so that's how we met all those years ago. And we were in a little studio, not dissimilar to this.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had a really good podcast. Didn't
We got on very well, and I always used to say, "Who's this bloody Glenn Harrold at the top of the chart? The only person I couldn't get off the top of the chart."
Yeah.
And then I met you, and I was like, "Oh, he's actually a nice bloke."
Yeah.
And then fast forward 20 years, and
Yeah.
somebody in our hometown in Portugal said, "Oh, have you heard of Glenn Harrold?" And I was like, "Bloody hell, I haven't spoken to him for a while."
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah,
in the
here we
studio
are.
today. Yeah,
So I've been out here about 4, 5, 6 years.
yeah,
And yeah, we've been hanging out for the last 6 months, haven't we?
yeah, yeah.
And the kids get on really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glenn, good to see you. Like, congratulations on the book coming out.
Thank you.
Why do you think, I've sort of mentioned a little bit in the intro about the book, but why do you think it's important now? Because I think there's a lot of topics in your book that there's a real overlap with biohackers and their interests,
Mhm.
but we don't often talk about the sorts of topics that you've covered in the book.
Mhm. So the book covers a lot of, my experiences with awakening, living a younger life where I was in a very, so I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. I struggled a lot in my early life. I was kicked out of school when I was 15, and I lived a very low conscious life back then. I was kind of a product of my environment. And, I found solace and, numbed the pain that I was feeling back then with booze and drugs. And my family became a gang on the streets because I didn't have a functional family at home. So I'd run around on the streets. So I lived a very low conscious life back
Mm.
then. Um, and, we're going to talk about it a bit more as we roll on. But it was really getting into my becoming a hypnotherapist.
Mm.
So the one thing I had was I was a musician. I'd learned to play the bass guitar, and I played in a punk band originally, and then we became the Sugar Ray Five, and we won a national competition in 1983, and that got me away from hanging around on the streets and took me off into a more positive direction.
Yeah.
And it was through learning to play an instrument that I then was on the cabaret circuit in South London. One day we shared the bill with a stage hypnotist, and I watched him manipulating the audience and getting people to dance around like chickens, do outrageous things. And I had this epiphany that I wanted to learn it, but I didn't want to do the stage thing.
Mm.
I wanted to learn it to heal because I saw in hypnosis a tool for healing. And that's exactly what I needed at the time. And so I signed up, I did a 2-year diploma course and loved it. Took to it like a duck to water. Became a full-time hypnotherapist.
I want to get onto that bit in
Yeah.
just a second, but
Okay,
because
I'm rattling
before
on a bit,
that,
yeah.
you were a green-haired punk
Yeah,
smoking heroin at lunchtimes.
yeah, I did do that. I did.
You don't do that now, do you?
No, it's a long, long distance. It's like a past life. It
Yeah.
really is. I mean, I look back as I was writing the book, I was, remembering these little crazy things that I did and got up to, and I was putting them in the book because it showed the contrast between my life then and my life now. And one of them was, that one lunchtime I was working in this printing factory. I was a driver. I used to drive around London. And one of the guys there, he had some heroin, and we smoked heroin one lunchtime. I forgot that I had to continue to drive and deliver my parcels in London. So I went around London in a little bubble of this heroin cocoon, delivering parcels, and it was an experience. And I was kind of, when I was at that age, I was so I was so reckless.
Mm.
I had no sort of care for myself or care
Well, you were
for.
homeless for a while as well, weren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I started sleeping on the streets when I was about 12
Mm.
because home life was so bad. I'd either run away or I'd get kicked out. And so I didn't sleep continuously, but there were lots of different nights that I spent sleeping on the streets.
Mm.
And I guess my only saving grace was that I grew up in a place called Orpington, in, it was quite a nice suburb of, outside London. And, it wasn't, at 10:30, the whole town shut down. So I just walk around the streets and
So it was
sleep in different
cold, but
places.
you were sort of safe.
It was cold. Yeah. That was the thing that I remembered about it. That was the worst thing when I think of it, you know, later on. The coldness on sleeping on the streets was the worst thing.
Mm.
But somehow I couldn't do it now in a million years. I'm I think I've become a bit of a snowflake.
Well, I don't think many of us could sleep on the streets now, especially in the middle of a British winter. Even a Portuguese winter would be pretty bad, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but
Portuguese summer
somehow
would be bad.
it would. And I always, whenever I see the guys downtown, I like giving them money because I know what it's like to do that.
Mm.
And as soon as I see them sleeping on the street, my empathy comes out, and I always give them money. But yeah,
And
that came up in a therapy session years later. So when I got on the healing path and I was correcting, a lot of my dysfunction from my younger life, and, really immersing myself in healing, I was in the middle of this kinesiology session, and kinesiology is where you muscle test to get deeper into the trauma, and you muscle test each time to get yes and no responses. And so I was in the middle of this session, and a fear of the cold came up. And at first I didn't understand it, didn't make any sense. But when I went deeper into it, it was the memory of sleeping on the streets and the being absolutely freezing all night long.
and
And
the book itself has so many stories like that. You talk about being beaten unconscious by gangs, and there's obviously
mm,
you were sort of in gangs as well, weren't you?
yeah, yeah,
And it's such a bonkers life
mm,
that you led in your early days. And one of the themes is going from chaos to consciousness.
yeah,
And I wonder if that has really helped you in your later days
mm,
get empathy with clients.
mm,
And obviously, you've got this incredible audiobook career.
mm,
You're sort of like a celebrity hypnotherapist
mm.
because you're so good at what you do. Do you think people relate to you because you've come from what a lot of people come through, just real chaos in their
Mm.
personal life?
Yeah, definitely. The real life experience helped me as a therapist, because if I saw someone who had some kind of addiction or they were struggling with something, I understood it because I'd been there and had it, and I knew what it took to get out of it and to break it. So I always naturally had that empathy with clients, and I loved helping people over difficulties and problems. And really, the awakening part of my journey was a huge part of it. So I do help, I know what it is to live a very unconscious life, and to be stuck, and to be struggling, and to not feel like I've got a future. I remember waking up in the morning feeling like, the world was just a really heavy place, and nothing was going to happen. Nothing good was going to happen.
Mm.
And I can remember that feeling. So I know what it is when people are stuck. I know what it is to, what they need to break out of it.
Yeah.
And that comes from a place of having experienced it, you know.
And you won BBC's Battle of the Bands in 1983. I've been doing a bit of research on it. I think the best way to describe it to people is like a sort of early day X Factor.
It was, yeah. So the thing that I did, I was running around in this gang. We were skinheads and punks in the 70s, and we were trying to get a band together. But every time we try and put it together, one of them would get put away, get put in Ballstall.
Oh,
So like the singer's away for 6 months. Oh shit, we can't get the band together. It was literally like that. And then on the fringes of this gang, there was a guy, and he approached me and he said, "Look," he said, "I'm playing guitar, I sing, and my brother's a drummer. Yeah, for 50 quid, I'll teach you to play the bass, and we've got this bass guitar, you can join the band." So I took his offer up, and as it turned out, he was a really talented singer, and guitarist. And so he taught me to play the bass guitar. I joined this band, and then I loved it. I love making music. And for the first time in my life, I found something that I had a passion for that wasn't causing trouble. It wasn't, being out on the streets. And so I just immersed myself in the band. And within 3 years, we'd won a national pop competition. So we'd entered a cassette into this national battle of the bands, and it got chosen. So we got into the Kent finals, and then we won that, and we went through to the southern area finals at the Lyceum. And then the final was on stage at the Hammersmith Apollo. It was the Hammersmith Odeon back then, the Hammersmith Apollo now. And by that time, we'd got so tight because we were practicing 6 days a week. And then we'd expanded the band. We brought in a couple of session musicians. And on the night, we just clicked. We just fell into place. And the scoring, it was like out of 150, we got 147 points. So it's like a Eurovision Song Contest scoring. It was, and we had Paul Gambaccini was the head judge. Alison Moyer was on there. Some top producers, and they all gave us tens for performance, song quality, and everything. We just blitzed it. And so we were the hottest band in the UK when we won that competition. And we had every record company in the UK was chasing us. And so we chose to do a showcase for CBS with a guy called Muff Winwood, who's Steve Winwood's brother. And he wanted to sign us because we'd won this competition by a mile, and we were a hot ticket. And all we had to do was play the songs that we'd won us the competition, and we were going to get a massive deal. It was a European deal, and America. It covered America. But on the night, the singer, he insisted on doing new songs that he thought were stronger. We weren't tight on them. My bass string broke just before we started, so I'm faffing around trying to change this bass string with these top execs, and basically we blew it. We blew this audition where it would have been so easy to just take off. But kind of when I look back, if we'd have got a deal then, and we had songs that would have been hits, we'd have become, proper pop stars. It would have. I was not grounded. I didn't know myself. I didn't have, my confidence came through my ego, and we were doing tons of drugs as well. We were doing acid, and so the whole dynamic in the band was very unstable. And going into that world with that kind of success, would have been a recipe for disaster. Yeah. So it's kind of a blessing that it didn't happen. Yeah. When I look back.
Even now, though, I bet you part of you thinks, oh, it would have been exciting.
Oh, and it was, because, when we won that competition, we did a bit of TV. And we used to have kids knocking on the door, and signing autographs. We went to the south of France as a band. And we'd done quite a bit of TV at the time. So we were getting recognised. And it was, sex and drugs and rock and roll. But the trouble was it only lasted for about 2 months. And then we were back on the dole. Yeah. And it was hard to go from that, having a little taste of that, to going back to a normal life, because, I just wanted to get back to where I'd been. And so for years later, I was writing songs and trying to get a deal, and it never quite happened. I always loved writing songs, and I still do that now. And I'm actually revamping a lot of old songs that I had wrote back then with AI platforms. It's amazing. They're covering the songs, and they're coming to life.
Every time you tell me about that, there's a spark in your eye. I know that's your big hobby at the moment.
Yeah.
And a lot of people listening to, it's obviously lucky that it didn't happen in terms of the pop, because here you are, probably the second best-selling hypnotherapist in the UK after Paul McKenna.
Yeah, well, on audio, the best.
The best. All right, ahead of Paul McKenna.
He's sold more books.
No, let's just focus on audio. Better than Paul McKenna.
Yeah.
And how many plays did you have on Spotify last month?
So 80,000.
80,000.
So I'm getting 8 million streams a year on Spotify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So fast forward a few years, the pop career didn't work out, and then you discovered this passion for hypnotherapy, which you eventually turned into your career. And Remind me again of the story when you first started, because what I did was I brought out my audiobooks and I got a deal with Audible, and I happened to coincide it with the month that the iTunes store launched.
Mm.
And I sort of got a bit lucky really, because there was only one competitor, and that was Glenn Harrold. But you'd been doing it for years before that. Remind me what happened when you started selling cassettes.
So yeah, studied to become a hypnotherapist. I was seeing clients regularly, and I literally saw about 1,000 clients before I started making recordings. And and it was one day a client said to me, "Could you record the session?" So I started like that. I recorded this session for her, and then I thought, "Oh, that sounds okay," because always kept a little basic recording set up at home
Mm.
from my music days. So I had a little reel-to-reel unit, and I'd record songs on it, and then one day I just recorded a confidence recording, you know, and I recorded it for myself as well, because at that time I'd become a, you know, pretty proficient hypnotherapist, and I was getting good results with clients. So I started to record these positive thinking and deep sleep, these, you know, very simple tracks, and I'd run them off onto cassettes, and then I'd deliver them into local stores.
Didn't
And
you
I,
persuade the chemist that you could put a few on the counter?
yeah, so I was working above a chemist, and I put a little, it was a homemade display because I didn't have any money. So I made a display out of balsa wood, and it had 6 blank cassettes in it, and I printed the covers myself, and it all looked a bit naff. But back then, there was nobody doing that. So I put them in the local chemist, and they started to sell straight away. And I'd go back a couple of weeks later, and the ladies in the shop would say, "Oh, this guy came in. He said he's sleeping like a baby because he's been listening to your hypnotherapy
Did
track."
you expect them to sell?
I didn't have any expectation because I just loved doing it. I just something that I enjoyed making these recordings in the hope that they would help
Mm.
people. So I didn't have any big expectation. But the funny thing was, at that time, or a little bit before that, I joined a little group called the Kent Healers, because as I was kind of waking up, I, you know, I was drawn towards spirituality. It was kind of a thing that, you know, really was opening up for me at that time. And so I joined this group called the Kent Healers. And at the end of the little thing we do there, the hands on healing, that kind of thing, the guy that was running it, he'd say to me, he'd say, "Glenn, I want you to do the meditation at the end." And I always used to clam up because I still didn't have the confidence to, you know, to project myself. Um, and he'd insist, he'd say, "Look, I'm being told," he was a psychic, and he used to say, "My guides are telling me that you've got to deliver this meditation." He said, "It's really important for you to do this." And I used to think, "No, look, ask somebody else." But he'd insist, he'd make me do it. And at the end of it, I'd always feel good.
Mm.
So it's the first time I did that. And that was before I became a hypnotherapist. And, you know, before I ended up selling millions of recordings. So, you know,
So,
I was
so,
getting that message, you know, that was mad when I think of it.
and so you started selling in one chemist, and
Yeah.
then did you speak to the owner of the chemist and say, "Can I sell them in the other chemist as well?"
Yeah, he was a really busy guy. I managed to, I rang him about 50 times before I got through to him. And he said, "Look, if these are selling in 3," he said, "roll them out into all of my stores on a fiver on sale or return, and we'll see how they go." And so I used to drive around to these stores, replacing the cassettes, and the ladies would give me, you know, fiver for each one that are sold. And I used to come home with, you know, like $1,000 in my pocket. It
And
was,
compared to what you'd been earning before,
I was earning less than $1,000 a month,
yeah.
and I picked that up in one day. You know, I had this epiphany at that moment. I thought, well, if I can do this in this little area, if I can do this all over the UK,
Mm.
then, you know, the sky's the limit. And so I used to meditate on it every day. I used to visualize my recordings going out there and connecting with people, and, you know, going out all over the world. And at that time, I didn't know how that was going to happen, but it was just, I had this vision, and I used to enforce it through meditation and using the law of attraction, that it would go out there and connect with people. And it kind of worked. And like you said, you know, I got very lucky all the way along. I was kind of in the right place at the right time, you know, so many times, to the point where Audible just launched in the UK, and a friend of mine had said, "Oh, why don't you get your audios on Audible?" And this was right at the beginning. So I got onto Audible, and suddenly they were, getting huge figures on there. And I must have been on the App Store.
Yeah.
What did you say? The
It
iTunes?
was the iTunes store that launched about the same month that I brought mine out, and so
Yeah.
you were on there at the start as
So I
well.
was on there. Another
Yeah.
lucky thing. We got lucky, right place. But I think when you're, it was your path, it was my path, and so when it's kind of your vocation, when you're on the right path, it's like the universe aligns to
Mm.
to reinforce that, and you do get very, very lucky very often,
Mm.
and that was the case with me.
And you make your own luck as well. I mean, you were so persistent with those cassettes. A lot of
Yeah.
people just wouldn't have done all that themselves.
Well, I've been so sick of struggling and being broke. That had been my life, and coming from addiction and sleeping on the streets and all that. Suddenly, I had this little window of opportunity,
Mm.
and as soon as that opened, I just was 100%, and I didn't mind grafting at it. I really did. I'd literally when I got into Waterstones, I I would um, back in those days you could actually ring Waterstones up individually, and so I was selling boxes of cassettes. What I did when I got to that point, I borrowed £1,000 off the bank to get some nicer display stands created because my little homemade ones weren't cutting it. So I got these nice display stands, and then I started shipping them out into Waterstones, and it got to a point where they were selling really well in Waterstones. So, but I'd phone up the stores and they say, "Well, we can't take any more because you're not on core stock." So I say, "Well, what's core stock?" And they say it's where head office gives your recordings a rating and they order them on repeat.
Mm.
So I phoned up head office, they checked the sales and they said, "Yeah, right, well, you're going on core stock." And I went on to the highest level of core stock, which meant every Waterstones in the country had to keep like 10 of all the recordings that were on, I think it was A core stock or whatever it was. And so I'd get these faxes come through, and there were, I was shipping, big boxes out to Waterstones all over the country. So I'd do that, and I'd literally sell the recordings in the day. I'd be making them at night. I'd do my accounts at night. I'd be taking all these boxes around to the post office. It was a real homemade setup,
Yeah,
but
brilliant.
I was doing like 18 hours a day, and then it just took off because the whole meditation and hypnosis market was in its infancy,
Mm.
and now it's like $1 billion industry. Meditation's massive, but back then it was quite small. So I was kind of this little fish in this huge pond, and it was just going to get bigger. And I never did any promotion or marketing, and it just everything I did just sold because I was just lucky, very lucky.
So if you fast forward to today, and you are the UK's best-selling hypnotherapist in terms of audio, and tens of millions of people have listened to your audio and continue to do so. And now you've obviously told the story. In the book, you told some of these stories and some of the other stories about being a green-haired punk and so on.
Yeah.
And I sort of wonder what you'd like people to take away from it. Obviously, that word awakening is part of the title, and so it's sort of really important to you.
Mm.
And I said earlier, I think I noticed with the biohackers that I know, especially those who lean a little bit more towards the spiritual or the libertarian or the sort of conscious quote. And I think this is not really a series of topics that I cover very much on this podcast.
Mhm.
And I'm a bit more skeptical than you, so
Mm.
I like learning from you as well. And I don't agree with everything, but what would you like people to take away from it, and especially the sort of people who might listen to this
Mm.
podcast,
Mm.
who are biohackers, really interested in optimizing mind and body, and
Mm.
spirituality would come into that as well.
Spirituality from what was just the foundation of my success because, like I said, when I was younger, I operated from a very low level of consciousness, and so it was something that I, I was looking for something. I was looking for a way out, and it was one time in my late 20s, and I don't come from a spiritual family or my family. My granddad was a bare knuckle boxer and a gambler, a bookmaker in South London. My dad was a wheeler dealer, and but it was one night I was driving. I used to drive a minicab. I was kind of hustling my way through life. I was playing in bars and clubs, And in the evening, I was driving a minicab around the West End.
Mm.
And it was one night I drove home and I was driving down the M20 and I just had this awakening, this massive epiphany that I can, it's still hard for me to understand what happened, but it was like this awakening.
It was a moment.
It was a big moment.
Or you were like listening to LBC at the time or something.
No, it was, I was switched off. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just like 4 o'clock in the morning. I was tired and suddenly I had this massive, it was like my, crown chakra, it just blew up and it just like, I connected to this higher level of consciousness. And it sounds mad now, but it changed my life so much to the point that I was, at that point, I was still lost and struggling. I was trying to get on a good path. But from that moment on, I just woke up and there was another part of me that was activated. It was my consciousness, my higher consciousness. And so I remember going to the,
What do you mean, wake up?
um, it was that I suddenly realized that this, I mean, it sounds cheesy. Whenever you talk about this kind of thing, it sounds super cheesy, but it was like my heart opened
Mm.
massively. You know, like when you see your kids born or you see your kids doing amazing things, your heart opens and it's this unconditional love that you have for them. And in that moment, I had that for the first time for myself. I'd always had a real low opinion of myself in a lot of ways, low self-esteem because that was my childhood. Um, but suddenly I felt this love and compassion for myself. I felt it for my family. I felt it for and I just had this huge awakening. And and I just had this thirst for knowledge from that time. So the next day I went to the local library and I was looking for books on spirituality because I just had this thirst for knowledge in that particular area. And I always remember it was a little library near Maidstone, and it didn't have a lot of books on spirituality. And I found one that the only one I could find was one called Jesus, You and Me by Cliff Richard. And I looked at it and I thought, it's not quite what I'm looking for, but it will do. So, I read the book and I took a few little gems from it. And then I found Louise Hay, I found Stuart Wilde, and I found some really big Deepak Chopra people like that. Anthony Robbins, that was another one. And I just started immersing myself in all these self-help books and spiritual books, and then joined the Kent Healers group. And it just opened up this new world for me.
Mm.
And I loved it, and I got to a point where, I'd be standing in this room in Tunbridge Wells with these little old ladies and, guys that were sort of 30 years older than me doing hands-on healing. And I'm thinking, I was a punk rocker like 15 years ago, at the front of the stage at a Clash concert, gobbing at the bands. And now I'm in this little room with these old healers, but I loved it. I loved that new journey and what it started to open up. And I'm convinced that without that awakening and that epiphany that I had, I wouldn't have become a hypnotherapist, because it was from the healing that I was doing that it kind of led me into becoming a hypnotherapist. And yeah, it just opened up a new world, and it was been amazing ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you know, I sort of one of the things that I really love in books is where people tell a great story and then give you their message, which you've definitely done with your book.
Mm.
And I wonder what you would like people to sort of take away in terms of like, that sounds great. I think everyone would like a spontaneous awakening
Mm.
and then the success that follows.
Yeah.
But how does it happen, and what do you hope will happen
Mm.
for people when they read the book?
So I hope that you know I talked about my awakening process in the book, and part two of the book is very much about how you do it, how you go from struggle, hardship, lack of opportunity into an abundant, prosperous, happy life. And so there's a certain number of steps that you can take that will, open up doors for you and help you to get on that path. And so I really, one of the cornerstones of it is really building a daily meditation practice. Because when you do that, you're accessing your unconscious mind, which is where your creativity comes from. It's where you access your higher consciousness. Um, and in that state, when you're meditating, you've got that part of your consciousness that's open. And from that, you can access, um, higher forms of knowledge and wisdom. And I always do that, even now, whenever I'm struggling or I'm stuck with something, I'll switch off my conscious mind. I'll come out of the monkey mind and I'll spend time in either self hypnosis or meditation and ask for that guidance, that higher wisdom to come down through my, it's like a channel. If you think of it, your crown chakra on the top of your head is a conduit to, God consciousness. I, I, I've experienced it and I've felt it so many times that I don't question it now. When I was first on the path, I did question it a lot. I thought, am I going nuts? Because I grew up in a very, practical, down to earth London family. And they all thought I'd gone nuts. They thought I was back on the drugs when I started to open up spiritually. And so they didn't understand it. But then when I
They
started,
probably still do think you've got a bit nuts, don't they?
they do, but because I've had a lot of success in my later life, then it kind of makes people think, well, maybe he was on the right path. Maybe there's something in what he's doing. So I love kind of inspiring people that way, showing them that, this was, you can transform your life. And I think this is the missing part for a lot of people. I think their higher consciousness is their superpower. It's the part of themselves that, does open up so many opportunities and taps you into your authentic power. But because of the way the world is, that we very much live in this matrix where, we go to school, we're in school at 5, we go to the school system, you're
I was waiting to bring up the word matrix.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's people go through that whole process and they go into higher education, and there's so much indoctrination in the mainstream that keeps us from accessing our higher consciousness. Because, I believe that the powers that be don't want a very conscious, enlightened population, because when you're conscious and you're sovereign, you're much harder to control. Whereas if you go through the whole matrix system and you're struggling, you're confused, you're looking for answers, then you're much easier to manipulate and control. And we saw that during COVID. The whole manipulation that went on through COVID was off the scale. And people are realizing it now. We're going through this great awakening because a lot of people are looking at that and realizing that we were scammed. We were completely scammed by the media, the governments around the world. And so people are waking up.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've now got him rolling on some of his favourite topics.
That is, it's part, it does tie in with the whole awakening thing, because when you become more conscious, and I've seen this, every person I know that is immersed in spirituality and is very conscious in that way, saw through it all, sees through the matrix, because it does give you it's almost like you get another set of eyes where you can see through illusions. And it's quite mad. It's quite crazy. There's this amazing thing that I saw the other day where I forget the name of the guy, but a few people have been talking about this, where if you get and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but if you get a laser and you shine it on a wall whilst you're on DMT, so you're activating this other part of your consciousness, you see code. You see this code in the laser. And everyone who's done it around the world sees the code. And I haven't tried it yet, but I said to my mate who runs ayahuasca ceremonies along the coast, I said, mate, we've got to try this.
We should do a podcast and record it while we do it.
That would.
I don't know if you've seen, but
that would be amazing.
You know Brian Johnson, the guy who spent $5 million on his health. He's a famous biohacker. He's been live streaming as we record this in the last few days, his experiences on mushrooms, 5 grams of mushrooms, so quite a lot.
Wow.
And tens of thousands of people have been sort of tuning in to watch.
Yeah.
And it's been really inspiring for people. So
really?
this might be the next one.
So this is another version of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That could be great.
And going back to the stories, I think there's going to be 40 to 50% of people listening to this podcast who are going to be nodding along vigorously when you talk about the Great Awakening and the
Yeah.
rest of it. And I hope from the book
Mm.
that the rest of those people are going to be more drawn into your message because of the power of your stories that you've been telling today. I really hope that's the
Mm.
case, and I'm sure it will be as well.
Mm. Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's I think, we are going through this collective awakening, and it's kind of an amazing thing to witness. And but there are, like you said, some people get it and understand it, and others don't. It's new to them. If I've got family members I talk to about stuff, and I can only speak to them on a certain level
Yeah.
because they just don't get it. You go any further than that, and it's just out of their conscious understanding.
And in terms of the Great Awakening, because as you know, you're sort of deeper down this, I'm not going to call it a rabbit hole, but you think about this stuff more than I do.
Mm,
And I think I do, but I might just not be explain it in quite the same way.
mm,
But what is the ideal? What to you would be the ideal scenario where the Great Awakening just becomes this fantastic thing that changes the world that we live in?
mm.
How would it look after the Great Awakening?
I think it would be that, we would, if the Great Awakening happened en masse and everyone was there, we wouldn't have these scummy politicians in power. We'd have conscious leaders that were, making choices for the good of humanity. All the greed and corruption would disappear. And, that's the utopia, isn't it? But maybe this planet is a planet of duality that we have to experience. We have to experience the dark and the light on this planet. It's part of, I believe, in Hinduism, they say that there are 14 realms and the earth is somewhere in the middle. And dependent on the karma that you create in this lifetime will be, will determine where you go next. So you either move up to the more angelic realms, or, if you're like Bill Gates, for example, you're plummeting south.
Yeah,
And I've always, when I first heard that concept, it resonated with me
yeah.
because I've heard it in other. It's not just Hinduism; it's other spiritual teachings that align with that. So I do think this life is an opportunity for us to graduate and to, to leave a ripple, a positive ripple in this world, and to, live a conscious life. And just my own life, talking about my past, where, as I mentioned, my granddad was a bare knuckle boxer. He fought on the streets of London for money. He was a bookmaker. He was hard as nails. He was one of 10 brothers that came over from Ireland. They were all boxers. Um, and my dad was, very shut down, very cold hearted man, didn't, uh, just abandon us as kids. We kind of grew up on our own. And, whereas because of my awakening with my kids, I've been able to look after them and nurture them and be there for them.
Mm.
I think a lot of, I think the way things were in the 60s and 70s, things were very different. Life has moved on, and we understand a lot more about how to raise kids. But also there's this shift in consciousness where, we are, focusing more, on our kids. So my point is that I've kind of broken the cycle, that family cycle. And and I believe in a life after. I believe that, when I reincarnate in the next life, I'm not going to come into a toxic family that I grew up in, one that, where my relationship with my mother was just, so toxic that, she nearly killed me a number of times. She used to throw bread knives at me. She was extremely violent, and that's kind of why I started running away from home as a kid. Um, so I'm not gonna, but I did a lot of work with my mum. When I woke up and I got into therapy, I did a lot of work with her, and I broke a lot of the karmic patterns between us. So I know that I'm not going to repeat that cycle in my next life with her,
Mm.
because I honestly believe that, a lot of relationships can be, where you're just working out karma. And when I first understood that and I first got that, it made me completely change the way I felt about my parents and the way that I viewed my past. It took me out of feeling like a victim into realizing that they were just victims of their own, their upbringings. And they just had a low level of consciousness and they just brought us up the way they thought they should.
Mm.
So, yeah, it broke me out of that way of thinking and being the victim. And again, my life changed. So it was all part of the awakening. All of this is linked into that. And it suddenly empowered me. I went through life thinking, all right, I've had a shit life up to now, but it's I had control at that point, and it changed my path from there on. So yeah, and that awakening. Sorry, just to talk about the awakening because I keep deviating a little bit, but it is something that I think it's so important for people to connect with that in this lifetime. It's an opportunity for all of us to graduate this life and to hopefully make it into those angelic realms.
So we just need to be in a car at 4 o'clock in the morning, driving down the M20.
Yeah, it can be that, or it can be a DMT trip. It can be an ayahuasca trip.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you talk about that in the book as well, don't you?
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
Um, so obviously you've given us a potential template, and I think that's sort of in terms of biohacking and optimizing ourselves, that's really important. And then in terms of your routine, I'm fascinated to know how that translates into your daily routine because you know in NLP we talk about a sort of a logical levels triangle where at the top you've got all the really important stuff like identity and behavior and values and beliefs. And at the bottom you've got like, right, what do I do every day that might make a bit of a difference?
Mm.
And that all relates to the top stuff. So, what is your daily routine like? I know you're very into looking after yourself.
Yeah. So first thing in the morning, I've just finished a 14-day detox. So every so often, I'll completely detox and cleanse my system, fast for 48 hours. Um, I used the Zen cleanse protocol. That was a part of it. And so now I'm kind of back into my normal routines. So first thing in the morning, I'll have a hydration drink, which is like made up of water, lemon juice, and then psyllium hulk and
You gave me the recipe before. Look
yeah,
revolting, but I'm sure it does the trick.
it's you kind of get used to it.
Yeah.
It's always a bit rank at first, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And so yeah, I do that. That's a yeah, really good start. And then I do a little workout in the morning, yoga and stretching, and yeah, just throughout the day, keeping fit and healthy. I play tennis once a week, paddle once a week. I was playing walking football out here, and I love it. I think of when I was younger. I'd be in a pub, and someone would come in and they say, "Look, I've got these pills, and they're like, a couple of quid, and they're really gonna get you off your nut." And I just go, "Yeah, okay," and I take them. I wouldn't know what was in them, but some. I think now I'm so cautious about what
Yeah.
I ingest. And I've kind of gone the other extreme because I want to, my kids are quite young, they're 8 and 10, and I want to, be in my 90s and still be conscious and have all my faculties and watch them getting married. And, so I really invest a lot in my health these days. It's really a priority.
And you obviously mentioned meditation's been quite a big talking point, and I think meditation, whether you call it meditation or self hypnosis or even prayer or trance, whatever you
Mm,
want to call it, that's obviously a big thing for you.
mm.
Is that a daily thing? Does it come at a particular point in the day? Do you try and make time for it, or?
Yeah, I do most days. Most days I'll spend in an altered state of consciousness, even if it's just 5 minutes,
Mm.
because you find, you like you, I've got so many projects. I've got this new book. I've got my new meditation titles coming out. I've started revamping my old songs with AI platforms and making videos. So I love it. I love that creative output, and I'm so immersed in that. But it can get a bit, I'm got a couple of businesses and then family life. So with all that going on, they say that we make more decisions in a week than our grandparents made in a year
Really?
because
Wow.
there's so many things going on in
Yeah.
our life, which is brilliant. I know you love it. You've got
Yeah.
a very busy life and there's amazing opportunities everywhere you look. But you do have to counterbalance that.
Mm.
And meditation is a great way to do that. So just sitting there for 5 minutes and switching your mind off and clearing away all thought and allowing yourself to breathe slowly and dropping down into a relaxed state, then you allow your mind to recharge and you come back refreshed. You also connect with your creativity in that space. So when you come back out of it, you're making, your creativity is flowing again and you're making better decisions because you've had that little rest. So even 5 minutes of meditation a day is crucial.
On that theme, a mate of mine was at Fulham versus Manchester City this week.
All
And he
right.
was asked, he and his son were allowed to go on the pitch before the game. They were allowed to sort of just check it all out. And so they got there really early. And Pep Guardiola was sitting in the dugout.
Mm.
And they went over and offered him a sweet. And he was very polite and said, no, thanks. And then for half an hour, he was just sitting there, not looking at anything, not looking at his phone, not talking to anyone, just looking into the middle distance and thinking. And I thought, bloody hell, that is the secret to his success.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's where the real deep thought comes in, not looking at charts or busying yourself.
It's quiet.
Just sitting there and thinking.
Yeah. That a lot of those top guys, the top coaches have that. They have that ability, don't they? That, I know Mourinho was, he's got a degree in psychology. And so he was
also...
also...
help Benfica win a bit more.
They're starting to do well, though, aren't they?
Yeah,
Getting a bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having that, you find most people who are, have very busy lives know to do that as well, because otherwise, if you're just on a treadmill and you're carrying on, you burn out. When I was working full time as a hypnotherapist, I used to work in a place called Chislehurst, which was like a stockbroker belt. And I used to see a lot of guys that were working in the city, 18-hour days, all day, all on manipulating figures. And they'd live in these big, multi-million pound houses, but they were having panic attacks and burnout. And so it really taught me something. I learned a lot as a therapist. And, I learned to teach them how to have a bit of balance in their life. And they were always really good sessions because it was often the first time they'd ever meditated. And suddenly it was like, they open up a different world and, they have this balance in their life and it changes everything.
Glenn, we got to go. Absolutely loved this. It's been brilliant. Tell people about the book, where they can, obviously on Amazon and available everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon and it's called Awaken and Ascend. And it is going to be, it's going to be available.
It'll be out by the time people
By the time we watch
this.
this, it's going to be out, yeah. And so do download it and check it out. Thank you.
Brilliant. Cheers, mate. Really
Cheers,
enjoyed
buddy.
this. And let's do another one soon.
We should.
I love hearing all the old stories. And we can there's a few things we disagree on as well. So next time we'll get into that as well.
We should. We should always.
Love it, Glenn. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, buddy.